We did show that grass utilised is what's driving the profit. We do have to challenge our own support network on that. So whoever's in the yard with you, whether it's your advisor, whether it's your group, whether it's your input suppliers, the question is simple. Is the conversation going to lead to more grass utilised and more margin on the farm? If it's going to lead to more cost, we need to be having a different conversation.
Teagasc hosted the National Dairy Conference last week in both Clonmel and Cavan. The theme of this year's conference was Pathways to Progress, with key sessions looking at milk price, the key farm performance priorities, collaborative farming arrangements, and driving further progress in Irish dairy breeding. I caught up with a number of the speakers on the day to gain an insight into some of the main messages from the conference. Firstly, I spoke to Joe Patton, head of Dairy KT, who presented a paper on some of the key farm performance indicators in session 1. I started by asking Joe to outline what was learned regarding future milk markets.
We had Chris Walkland in for that session, James. It was a sobering message, really. We are in a downward cycle, but we haven't hit the bottom of it yet, probably. That it's looking, based on Chris's numbers and his projections, mid-30s in base price by sort of the spring of next year, and holding probably at that level till quarter 3. So that in the mid-30s as his projections of price, okay, that's based on his own analysis, and that's really driven by quite a significant degree of supply. So a lot of areas in the world having a very good production year. You know, lots of milk, up 7 to 8% in some major regions. And it's going to take time to sort of burn off that supply. Demand being quite decent, but supply just upticked in a lot of places. And he did make the point, I thought it was very interesting one to be reminded of it actually, that it doesn't take a huge degree of oversupply to cause a wobble in the market. So the message for farmers was very much around planning for the mid-30s at base. I'm thinking that was probably going to happen until post-peak, really, in this context. So that's
probably not what farmers wanted to hear, Joe, but I suppose important that they did hear it all the same.
That's it. Look at what we were conscious to do. Look at nobody wanted to hear that. We're very aware of that, but at the same time, I think in the room on both days, both in Tipperary and in Cavan, that people listened to that, said, okay, look, not ideal by any means, but we have to plan for that now. It's not that we're going into next year thinking that everything is going to stay the same. Look, we know that anyway. Like, people have really, it's been the biggest thing. People are talking a lot about the changes in milk price and the rapid changes in milk price before Christmas. But so that's going to continue a little bit into the after period. Funny to say, we mightn't feel it that much for a lot of spring calving farms, that through January, February, the level of milk production will be relatively small. But it does mean that when we come back in with significant amounts of volume back in March, April, May, we could be lower than what we are at the moment coming into when the production season kicks off, really. So look, if we're not saying anything other than we need to be aware and we need to plan for that. Quite sobering, but I think there was a lot of people were they're, I suppose, glad to hear the message rather than glad to what the message said, I suppose, James, is the way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned there that plan. I suppose off the back of that, what can farmers do, I suppose, to reduce their exposure in with regards milk price cuts, Joe? Because it's inevitable, obviously, as you say, that they're coming. So how do farmers insulate themselves or protect themselves as best they can?
Yeah, well, look, we can't be naive enough to be thinking that we can come up with a formula that's going to insulate people against the full degree of those cuts. And I know you're not saying that, James, but do you know what I mean? The idea is, look, at milk price is still a major determinant of margin year on year. But what's the worrying part, I suppose, and we heard that too in other sessions on the day, that the range at farm level is quite significant, and that maybe next year we're sort of sliding into a cycle where some farms could get quite exposed to the lower milk price. I know Patrick showed it for the Tipperary conference that based on the projected milk price that Chris talked about, there would be 20% of farms in Tipperary would be producing milk at below the cost of production. That's a very sobering thought. And those farms all farms, but those farms in particular need to be thinking about what can be done. And, again, no magic bullet here, but a couple of things that were talked about. And some of this came from the floor as well, which is very encouraging. Absolutely need to establish our cost of production at the moment. We do need to look at where we're at, a cash figure or a profit monitor figure for where the costs of production are. We need to benchmark that against a sort of a standard through ourselves or through a group. We need to say, well, is there a couple of cent here or there that could be saved? It will all add up. The question around the long-term projects, like the funded projects, if stuff was funded from cash flow, do we need to look at the structure of debt on the farm? That needs to be done during the quiet time. No point in doing that when we're in trouble and things are very tight. Those are big things. But then also from a farming point of view, there's a total requirement then to look at having a plan for getting grass into the diet and purchase feed out of the diet a little bit for next spring. And I think one of the bigger ones, James, that we talked about on the day was, we talk about it all the time, review stocking rate and act early if required. Like, review stocking rate, that means that, for some farms there may be an adjustment needed, and with beef price being where it is, there might be opportunities there. But, we're conscious of this. We can't give a very blanket message on that, because some farms would be very much on target at the moment. Some farms are maybe overstocked and some farms are understocked. So we can't answer that for the individual unless we look at the numbers. So I think the big thing is sit down in a quieter time now and look at the cost of production, benchmark it against something and some set of figures that make sense, and then have a plan for grass production. Like, we can't be in a situation, James, where we're relying on good weather next spring to put grass into the cows. Unfortunately, it's going to take a bit more than that. I think farmers
showed the trends, I think, Joe, in terms of the concentrate fed per kilos of milk solids produced. They have been on an upward trajectory, and I suppose that's something that does need to be realigned, and you pointed to that on the day.
Sure. And I think, look, we asked the question in Cavan where, since in the last 5 years, which, what category has had the biggest increase in cost? On the day, I think they said, James, that people felt that it was energy and rental and labour were the biggest changes, but they weren't. The biggest changes were machinery depreciation and particularly feed. So purchase feed cost is the single biggest change over the last 5 years, which is kind of worrying, because that's going to be a cost in the system every year and every day, basically. And I think, it was, I suppose, the other thing we have to point out there too is that there has been no increase in cow productivity on the back of the extra concentrate. So I know a lot of the time people say, well, we got a good response to the feed and we did and we didn't and all the rest of it. But look at the figures, on average, we were doing about 435 of solids off 1.1 tonne of concentrate. Last year, we're at 430 kilos of milk solids for closer to 1.4 tonne of concentrate. So as a general rule and as a general trend in the industry, supplement has replaced grass. There has been no performance benefit to it, despite all of the speculation or all of the claim, I suppose, about the response to the individual kilo. We're now at a situation where it's taken 3 kilos of concentrate to sell a kilo of solids. That figure was closer to 2 not so long ago. So, we need to get our grass message back front and centre, James, and that will improve the milk productivity as well. We are not saying we're going to underfeed cows by any means, but we need to feed it very well, but it needs to be fed more from grass, really. And that's the key message coming from the farm data.
So that's, Joe, from what I'm getting from you there, it's really about farmers need to review their own farm and business, benchmark their costs, and the last point, as you said there, is it really about aligning stocking rate with grass grown on the farm and maximising grass utilised on farms. That's the real driver of profit at the end of the day.
That's pretty much it, James, but we have to be careful and say that if we just say that we're going to cut concentrate or we're just going to cut cows, we mightn't get the outcomes we want. What we have to do is look at what we're doing from a grazing management perspective, and then the right things will happen, in terms of concentrate and stocking rate as well. And I think one final point on it, I suppose, we did show that grass utilised is what's driving the profit. We do have to challenge our own support network on that. So whoever's in the yard with you, whether it's your advisor, whether it's your group, whether it's your input suppliers, the question is simple. Is the conversation going to lead to more grass utilised and more margin on the farm? If it's going to lead to more cost, we need to be having a different conversation.
Thanks very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Next up, I spoke to Martina Gormley, dairy specialist, who chaired session 2 on collaborative farming options within Irish dairy farming. Before hearing more on that, I started by asking Martina to outline how farmers can be best prepared for the busy spring period from a labour perspective.
It's 2 months or even less on some farms before they start calving. So look, I suppose, James, it's probably down to 2 or 3 things at this stage because, whatever development work in terms of buildings or conversions or things like that is probably taking place, or farmers are probably maybe finishing up on those bigger jobs at the minute. So at this stage, James, I suppose it's down to probably 2 things. Number one, have you got enough help? So have you enough people secured and locked in, I suppose, for help for next year? And not just spring, but for the whole year, because look, we know that people need a bit more assurance and guarantees than just spring. So have you that done? Have you looked around locally? Who might be interested in a few bob or a day or 2 days or a milking or 2 milkings or whatever it might be in your local area? Is there students there going to college that be only delighted to be asked? If they're available for a day or two or evenings, is there other people that you might need to be thinking about that might be delighted to be asked? So that's number one, James. Have you enough help this spring? Okay, because facilities and technologies and that will get you so far. They absolutely will. But still, James, by and large, no farm can get through that work on their own. Okay, so that's the first thing, James. And then I suppose secondly is organisation now. So in terms of the next few weeks, and there's a lot going on still with winter feeding, grouping stock, drying off cows and milking. But if you can get organised in terms of the spring, in terms of I suppose auditing each facility now. So what I mean by that is your calving area. So is the calving gates working? Is the camera working? Is there any repairs and maintenance that needs to be done there? Similarly with the calf shed, James, is there a few small tweaks that could be made, be it with pinning or larger pinnings or something like that? Or a little bit of structure in terms of numbering, getting a fridge into the calf station area, having a dedicated area there, having a means to heat milk, thaw colostrum, store colostrum, and obviously transporting milk to make all that easier. And then having the supplies. There's a big long list of supplies that you need to have for the spring. So just kind of ensuring that you don't get caught out and having to be going to town or get someone to be going here or there for you. So have plenty of supplies in place. And I suppose in a place that's easy to find. And I suppose then, James, there's I suppose a few small things that maybe could be done at this stage in terms of lighting around the yards. People can get caught out with that. It's a lot of cow flows is a big thing in the spring, moving cows and calves and so on and so forth. So yeah, lighting, maybe a few more gates to make cow flow or movement that bit easier. So maybe those smaller jobs, if they could be got done in the next few weeks, I think it would be really beneficial to helping you get through the spring.
Okay, and I suppose, as you say, it's making sure you have enough people and then ensuring that you're best prepared prior to calving.
And James, like even for some, like that some farms will always dry off on a certain date. Some will maybe contemplating, whether to milk on or not. And like economics aside on that decision, but like that hour, 2 hours a day from drying up maybe a little bit earlier and giving the cows a break could be the saving grace here to get you organised, to give you that time, because you've still an awful lot of work on. A lot of people can say, oh, we're not as busy, but there's still a nice bit going on there. So perhaps if you were thinking of milking on, maybe you should question that. and say, look, what could I do with that time? And maybe I could get myself prepared a little bit more for spring if I didn't milk on, if I dropped that, or just stopped a bit earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And even and you're always talking about that Martina, in terms of making sure that you take enough time off, and it is a period where you need to get prepared, as you say, but also that you can. Christmas obviously falls in the middle of it, but that you can get some family time, get some time off, get recharged, and be ready to go.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
Last week at the conference, there was a number of collaborative farming arrangements discussed. Can you maybe just outline those briefly? Um, what what was discussed, and I suppose what's available to farmers.
Yeah, absolutely, James. So the key arrangements that were discussed on the day was partnerships. So be it registered or non-registered, and be it family or non-family. So partnerships was discussed. Share farming was discussed. Um, Companies was discussed. A few of the important requirements around companies. Joint ventures was discussed. In terms of joint herd numbers, sorry, I mean, and also leasing was also discussed, James, on the day.
And I suppose, what are the key considerations when a farmer is contemplating a collaborative arrangement? What should they be thinking about, or is there a number of things they should be
Yeah,
considering?
there is, James, absolutely. Yeah, there's a few really important things you need to be considering and planning, I suppose, even years in advance. You might have a year or in your head that you're thinking of when I'm X age or whatever, or my children is X age, that's the time that maybe I'd like to do something. So in the few years prior to that, in terms of, I suppose, the things that I would have taken from the conference was, number one, in terms of your farm. So getting your farm, I suppose, ready to be able to go into a collaborative ranges, because you have to be able financially to be able to do that. Okay, so the farm ideally would be, I suppose, ticking all the boxes there in terms of hitting the KPIs. So there's the KPIs in terms of the performance of the cows, the breeding of the cows, your percentages, your milk price you're getting, ensuring that that's all as good as it possibly can be. But then there's also the facilities, which are really, really important. So, like, are you going to have enough slurry storage on the farm? Feed space on the farm, calving facilities, calf facilities, or is there areas on your farm that would benefit from some investment? Okay, so again, you're trying to make your farm, I suppose, as attractive as you can for the next person, and as look, as everyone knows, that doesn't happen overnight. So certainly be thinking with the frame of mind as, is this farm attractive, and is it going to work in a collaborative arrangement with one or two people? So that's certainly one, James. The next one, James, is your financials. Okay, so again, I know a lot of people maybe don't like at the financial side of things, but again, if you're thinking of a collaborative arrangement, you really need to ensure that whatever arrangement you choose, that it's going to financially reward both parties, because otherwise it's not going to work, James. So you need to see, like, what are your costs at the minute. You need to get have a really good discussion with your accountant or your advisor in terms of what are your costs, what's profitability like to farm, and try and maximize that as much as you can. The other big one, James, a lot of people say, I should have probably said it first, but is getting the right person. Okay, so you're trying to organize your yard, your finances, making sure that's all humming. But then the next thing then is the right person. So spending a bit of time thinking about that. Maybe it's somebody that's working for you, but ideally a person that you know and trust, and can work with, the both you can work with. So that's a massive one, James. And then I suppose next, James, is the structures that I've just mentioned earlier on. So, you know, what structure or a collaborative arrangement would best suit you? And I suppose there's a number of questions, James, that each farmer needs to ask themselves in terms of, what involvement do they want in the farm? Do they want to be hands off or hands on? And that'll help them then decide on the collaborative arrangement as well, James.
Mm. And maybe finally, Martina, I suppose, who should be maybe having a look at the opportunities regarding these arrangements, and who would they speak to?
Oh, great question, James. So, in terms of, I suppose, the farmers that we normally see that are thinking of arrangements are, maybe somebody that hasn't an identified successor yet. That doesn't mean there won't be one down the line, but maybe just at the minute that there isn't one. And they're planning ahead. So, ideally, it wouldn't be left until your retirement age or whatever. It would be planned before that, so they're thinking ahead. I may not have a successor for the farm. I want to stay in farm, and I want the farm to stay in dairying. So look, it's fantastic that there's other avenues here or collaborative arrangements here. So typically speaking, they're the farmers that are thinking of these arrangements, James. And I suppose in terms then of the advice, and that came across really, really strong, I thought, at the conference, in terms of the importance of seeking out professional support. Okay, so be it from your accountant, your solicitor, your advisor, all three. But from people, I suppose, who have an awful lot of experience in this area, James, that have seen the pitfalls, have seen arrangements that didn't work because the structures weren't maybe put in place properly. And what I mean by that is in terms of your I suppose your proposals that you sign off, or your legal agreements, and also that there's an exit plan. That came really, really strongly from both farmers on the day, in terms of having an exit plan, both for the farm owner and for the person that's coming in, equally is important as well. So yeah, really, really important, James, to find out who is the person, be it the accountant, solicitor, advisor, that has the experience and does a lot of these arrangements. That is the person that you need to talk to.
Thanks a million, Martina. Look, it's a very, very important topic. And as you say, it's important that people are aware of what's available to them, and then, getting in contact with the right people in time, I suppose, is the point. And that came across very, very clearly in the conference. So thanks for your time, Martina.
No problem, James. Thank you.
Finally, I caught up with Stuart Childs, dairy specialist, who chaired session 3, Driving Further Progress in Irish Dairy Breeding. The EBI is celebrating 25 years in existence next year, and I asked Stuart to discuss what it had delivered to the Irish dairy industry and value over that period.
Well, James, I suppose it's hard to believe that the 25 years have come, or have passed. But like, the value that EBI has actually brought to the industry is pretty phenomenal. It's estimated, because of the increase in EBI of in and around €191 per cow, basically in the last 25 years, that's worth 5.5 billion to the Irish dairy industry. Like, so when you distribute that out, I know you're putting it over the 25-year period and so forth, and you distribute it out over all the herds, it mightn't sound like a lot, but it is actually still quite a significant sum of money. And the people that have embraced EBI have really benefited from it. And the whole country, I suppose, whether they've kind of embraced it or not, have actually benefited from the change in the breeding policy that was brought in by Brian Wickham and Dunne and his colleagues, would say, when they did it. And it wasn't popular at the time by any manner or means. But I suppose they stuck to the guns, and it has delivered, and it's been proved to have done what they have suggested it would do. And the other thing is, of course, it keeps changing, James, as well. Like, they keep evolving it, which is very important.
And I suppose it's, and Dunne always says this, it's cumulative, and I suppose that it's there to be built on as we go ahead into the future years. Farmers are selecting their sires, especially their dairy AI sires, maybe a lot earlier in the season, Stuart, and that maybe come from getting, those best bulls and making sure that they get their sex semen secured. Following Dunne's presentation, I suppose, what criteria should farmers be looking at when selecting dairy AI bulls, maybe for that 2026 season?
Well, I think the interesting thing, and it wouldn't be anything different to what we'd be saying, James, is that basically it's very hard for Dunne to stand on the stage and recommend exactly what people should be doing. It's going to be dependent on what the herd is itself. and what areas people want to focus on. And you can't, like, there's 7 or 8 criteria in the EBI there. Will say when you look at your EBI profile, you've your milk kilos, or your milk sub-index, your fertility sub-index, your carbon, your maintenance, etc., your health, all those ones. Like, it's hard to get improvement on every one of them. So you need to look to see where are the weaknesses in your own herd. And that could be different for you. And it could to what I'd have to pick, James, or even Joe will say whatever Joe would be picking might be slightly different as well, because it depends on what he wants to improve. But in the main, most people are looking to try to improve their milk output. And that milk output is really driven by the direction that you take in terms of percentages to improve the value of the litre of milk that you're selling, and the kilos of milk solids as well, to increase the kilos of solids that are sold, rather than focusing on the volume element of it, which obviously, when we bear in mind the way the EBI is constructed in terms of the economic values and stuff, there's actually negative weighting on milk volume because of the association with it drying off water effectively off of milk. So we want to drive milk solids, but that has to be driven by the actual solids generation rather than being carried in a higher volume of milk. And I suppose the other thing that we have to bear in mind when we think about that selection for milk volume, we have to associate it with the fact that you are going to drive the need to feed more in order to generate that milk, because milk volume comes at a significant cost in terms of energy. So cows will need more feed in the form of either extra grass or extra concentrate or extra silage and so forth to generate the energy that's required to produce that milk. Now, the milk solids don't come for nothing, but they do come at a lower energy cost than milk volume. So that's probably the area that most people will focus on in trying to increase that value of the product that they're selling. Now, I suppose more and more, like, fertility was the main driver of EBI being generated in the first place. I suppose we had been working off that RBI, we'll say the relative breeding index, which was very strongly influenced. In fact, it was pretty much only selecting on milk and had driven milk yields quite strongly, but had undermined the fertility of the national herd completely. And now we're back to where we were probably back in the early 80s in terms of fertility. Now, we still have a bit to go, but like, I remember when I started out working for Teagasc back in 2008, there was a bit of effort needed to select a bull for fertility, whereas now it's actually nearly taken as a given. And I know you can argue that there are some slightly, and the lads won't argue this either, that there is a little bit of inflation in that fertility figure because of genomic and genomic, etc. But it's still a significantly higher fertility figure and has stood the test of time and validation, I suppose, that Dunne is doing on the EBI with ICPF and so forth. Fertility has improved. There's no argument there. Like, empty rates are generally in or around maybe 10%, give or take, and maybe lower in a lot of cases. And that used to be up around 20%. So there's been huge improvement there. So fertility is still a very, very important attribute for seasonal calving herds such as we have here in Ireland. But probably the new area of focus, James, is probably around that maintenance sub-index in terms of that body weight of the cow, in terms of efficiency, and also around the health and I suppose the management as well, because obviously people don't want slow cows, they don't want cross cows, and that's quite understandable, obviously, because you have to deal with them for anywhere up to 300 days a year. Maybe if they kick you on day one and they still kick you on day 300, you're not going to be particularly fond of them. And then I suppose the health element, like, because of that fertility improvement, we also have a situation where we need to have good feet and legs and good udders and good teat placement and so forth, that over time, as the cow gets older, that they're not going to compromise the performance of the cow. So if we have bad feet, there's no point in her living longer if she's not going to be able to stay the pace basically on roadways and so forth. So good feet are going to be very important. So the health sub-index, and equally with the udder, I suppose, ligaments in the udder and so forth, as cows get older and produce more milk because of the maturity, it probably does put a bit more strain on the other ligaments and so forth. So good, strong ligaments are going to be important as well. So other attachment and so forth are all things that people need to consider. But that's covered off predominantly under the guise of the health index in terms of locomotion, etc., and the way that's picked up. So I suppose predominantly the milk information in terms of trying to improve the kilos of solids and the percentages to get that better value litre for sale. And then I suppose health and maintenance with an eye on the fertility as well, James, in a very long-winded answer maybe.
Yeah, but it's an important one that we don't forget about that fertility, sure, because you do hear it bandied around a little bit now. After the fertility's fixed, and the focus is on other things. But it's important, I suppose, that although fertility performance is improving, it needs to be built on. One last point, and it generated a lot of discussion across both days, was, and maybe an area of concern, is given the success of the sex female semen, where is the next generation of AI sires going to come from, Stuart?
Yeah, so that is a big concern, James, and I suppose we have seen it, and it has been asked at several events down through the last couple of years. I suppose we have been promoting the people, obviously, because of nitrates and everything that goes with it in terms of stock numbers and stocking density and so forth. That people don't necessarily breed more heifers than they necessarily need for themselves. And because of the sex semen, that has become a lot easier to do. Obviously, we can set our number where sex is working well, which it is in the main, to be fair. There's ups and downs, and that can happen with conventional equally so as well. But generally speaking, we'd say we have people maybe using less dairy straws overall, using sexed, generating the heifers, and as a consequence, we have less bulls on the ground. And obviously, from a calf point of view, that's seen as a positive, but from a breeding point of view, it's actually a negative, because we have less Frisian bulls available to pick from. And I suppose the beauty of the genomics and so forth, James, is it has the ability to identify these outliers that might have gone unnoticed in the past, but we now don't have that huge population of calves being generated for them. So we're pulling out of a smaller pool. And I suppose the other thing is that more and more, and Dunne was quite adamant that he can understand that why people wouldn't, but like, people are getting asked to push cows and calf to certain bulls, which may not be a top bull in many cases, because they're looking for those outcrosses to spread the bloodlines, basically, or to keep the genetic diversity in the population. But people aren't actually taking up the offer now, and I suppose people are looking for more in order to justify why should they put their best cow and calf to, as he described it on the day, mediocre bull. But the reality is that we're trying to keep the gene pool wide. We're getting to the point now, in his opinion, that if we keep going to where we're going and people are unwilling to start helping with the breeding program in terms of the next generations of bulls, we're going to get to a point where the next generation of bulls will actually be inferior to the heifers that are going to be bred. So it's an industry level conversation that has to be had, and I suppose Dunne is just kind of throwing in the ball on our last week about it to get people thinking about it. But I suppose there has to be a willingness for people to maybe forego a little bit in terms of genetic gain in their own herd in the short term in order to continue the upward trajectory of gain at a national level by generating the next generations of bulls. And there is a lot of work goes on in the background, James, I suppose, in terms of trying to select those cows and the sires to go with them to try to generate the ideal genes, or the genes that of choice for the Irish industry. But the uptake, as I said, is actually quite low. So people don't actually follow through on the requests of the AI centres to put certain cows and calf to the particular bulls. And that's possibly going to compromise the breeding program into the future. Now, as I said, conversations are going to start taking place, or have already been taking place, about how to do this and how best to do it. And I'm sure we'll, like before, in fairness, EBI came about by all industry working together. And I think if all industry work together, including farmers putting cows and calf and so forth, we can solve the issue, or cover off the concern, I suppose, that Dunne has raised. But it is something that is on the horizon, that if we don't do something about it, we're going to maybe end up looking across the waters for bulls, which aren't actually going to kind of work in an Irish system then.
And that's, I remember Dunne asking the question at both conferences, how much would it take? And it's a very much an open-ended question. How much would it take to put your best cow in calf to maybe sexed male dairy semen? So it's one for farmers to be thinking about. And look at, You've just touched on some of those things. We're hoping that we'll get Dunne and maybe on to get into more depth on some of those things and more detail. But I appreciate your time this week, Stuart. So thanks a million.
All right, James, no bother.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. My thanks to Martina, Joe and Stuart for joining me on this week's show. If you have any questions about this week's episode or would like to hear more on the Teagasc National Dairy Conference, all papers and presentations can be viewed on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to the Teagasc website. I'm James Dunne and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.